Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo was transcended and become cosmic god? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Akumakami64 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. It was over. UnoHana knew it was. If the great sea of powerful darkness overtaking the area hadn't been a good enough signal for the end of the Winter War, the sheer fact that there were no more mountain-destroying attacks being thrown around was a good sign. And yet, as he approached, something didn't feel right. He could sense Aizen's power again. More than that, it was fading away steadily. He had feared the man had become truly unkillable due to the Hogyoku, but it certainly felt like Aizen was dead or dying. Even if that wasn't the case, the Kido he implanted in Aizen was still a good backup plan, to seal him if nothing else. However, UnoHana also couldn't sense Ichigo, which was concerning. He knew that the Mugetsu would force Ichigo to sacrifice his powers, but he didn't think it'd be an instant thing. Losing that much power that fast could have torn Ichigo's soul asunder. Something he deeply hoped hadn't happened. There was the other possibility, that Ichigo's powers were disappearing so slowly that UnoHana still couldn't sense them. He'd almost prefer that. It'd give Ichigo time to adjust and say his farewells. It really wasn't fair to UnoHana, how much Ichigo had to endure and give up to fix the mistakes of himself and Soul Society. But reality rarely was fair. Soul King knew that was true. Well, this is definitely the place, UnoHana mused as he stood on the edge of the massively wide crater the Mugetsu had created. His eyes narrowed as he followed the spiritual pressure's location. It was weaker than Aizen had been at his base now. With a single flash step, he arrived on the spot, another, smaller crater. And in it lay what could only be Aizen's corpse. His face was back to normal now, and half of his body was mostly intact, covered in white with the base of the strange wings Aizen had gained from the transformation. However, his entire left side had been destroyed. It looked as if he had been cut cleanly in half, and his body had tried to regenerate, only for it to fail. There was no skin at all on that side, just muscle and bones with veins that weren't fully in their proper placement. It made him just a bit queasy to look at. Still, there were more important things to worry about too actually. One was Ichigo, but right now. He knelt down to the mangled corpse and carefully examined it, blinking as he realized something important. "Where's the Hogyoku?" he asked out loud. Aizen was dead, he could feel and see that. Had the Hogyoku been dislodged and just fell out somewhere nearby? He inhaled and, in the same instant, turned while drawing Benheim. The blade was stopped by fingers covered in a purple metal, holding the blade still, and UnoHana found himself staring past a hollow mask, into a pair of brown eyes. UnoHana leapt back cautiously, and his Zanpakuto was released without resistance. "Ichigo?" he asked uncertainly as he studied the being before him. Silence greeted him, and the entity's gaze never leaving him. UnoHana felt confusion and dread creep up his spine. If this was Ichigo, he had changed a lot. As most people did, his mind latched onto the familiar. The build was certainly the same, that Shahakusho was the distinct look of Ichigo's Bankai, and that was definitely the blade of Tensai Zangetsu on his waist. But that was the extent of the similarities. The Shahakusho was sliver with blue underling instead of black with red. And there wasn't just one Tensai Zangetsu, there were two, one on each side of the waist. One the familiar black of night, and the other a startling white of bones. The hands weren't even the same either, because Ichigo never had gauntlets before. They were thin, but made of a metal that possessed a purple hue. There was a crisscross pattern on the back creating several X shapes, all edged in black. Still, that was all tame to the last details. A hollow mask, but not the one that matched the description of Ichigo's, at least not last UnoHana seen. It had long twin horns on the sides of the mask, menacing in their sharpness, with two tribal marks going from the top to down over the mask's eyes, just behind the teeth. The markings themselves were blue, and it took UnoHana another moment to realize it, but the mask itself wasn't the normal white of a hollow's mask, but the same gray of the clothes. But in observing the mask, UnoHana confirmed that he hadn't imagined it earlier. The eyes did have a black scara, but the eyes themselves were the same powerful brown eyes UnoHana knew to be Ichigo's. "Ichigo, is that you?" UnoHana asked again, still feeling very unnerved. The silence was bad enough, but more important was what he felt. or didn't feel, Ichigo's spiritual pressure was still utterly absent from his senses. Ichigo, or the entity that appeared to be Ichigo, cocked his head at UnoHana as if to ask who else he would be. "What happened to you?" UnoHana asked in concern. This time Ichigo did answer, in his own way, by turning his weighty stare onto Aizen's corpse. Why wouldn't he speak? If this was Ichigo, or even if it wasn't, why the silence? "Do you know what happened? To the Hogyoku?" UnoHana inquired carefully. Ichigo didn't seem to notice the question, raising his hand to point his hands in the direction of their dead foe. "Wait, Ichigo, what are you?" UnoHana asked in surprise, only to fall silent as Aizen's body began glow violet before it dissolved into thick erasure. The effect created an interesting phenomenon. The erasure flowed with the soft breeze like it was embers being carried away, but glowed like large fireflies. UnoHana watched as Ichigo stared up at the lights with a solemn gaze and, despite his concerns, ended up joining him in the silence. A silence he suddenly found more comfortable. It wasn't anything like how UnoHana planned for things to end. He definitely didn't expect the aftermath of Aizen's death to be anything this peaceful. UnoHana glanced to the side, feeling that they would soon have company, and decided that it was best to end the moment. "You're not losing your powers, right?" Ichigo shook his head while still watching what was, for lack of a better term, Aizen's funeral pyre. "Yeah, that was kind of obvious," UnoHana accepted, rubbing the back of his head. "Think this is permanent?" Ichigo nodded. UnoHana stared. Ichigo wasn't exactly a chatterbox, but his lack of speech was strange. "Well, I'm not sure what to tell them, but your friends are coming," he pointed out as they both turned to face where they could be sensed, near the edge of the battle zone. Or UnoHana turned. Ichigo was turning, and then, by the time he stopped turning, he was right in front of them, half turned towards them. Needless to say, they were surprised. "What the hell?" Renji yelled, reaching for his Zanpakuto, gritting his teeth through the pain. "An errand car?" Chad said, scowling and unable to use his arms, still having to use a crutch for now just to stay up. Yuryu already had a spirit arrow pulled back, face tense with alarm. In his mind, he was back on the roof of Las Noches, watching the battle between the fourth Espada, and one wearing this same mask. "That mask," Orihime whispered, eyes dilating in fear for a moment before instinctively darting to Ichigo's chest. He looked to her, and Orihime flinched back for a moment before squinting at the eyes, brown and unchanged. While she held her blade tight, Rukia scowled as her eyes landed on the familiar blade at his side. "Ichigo?" she asked with a furrowed brow. Wordlessly, slowly, he raised one hand up to his face and grasped the side of his hollow mask. In an instant, he crushed it and exposed his face. And the tired smirk beneath the mask. It lasted only for a second before his mask reformed instantly. "Oh, thank the Soul King," Renji said with a groan as he put Zabumaru away. "What the hell are you doing, scaring us like that?" Yuri gave a pained sigh as he dispelled his arrow and bow. "With that mask, I thought he was going berserk again." "Yes, well," UnoHana said as he joined the group. "Ichigo is adjusting to something that happened to him." "Something?" Rukia repeated suspiciously. "What do you mean?" "I have no idea," UnoHana answered with an enthusiastic grin. They were all less than amused, practically face-faulting at that answer. Except Ichigo, whose ominous stare was starting to make UnoHana worry. He didn't think his teeth would survive an elbow to the face from Ichigo right now. "Right, yes, well, to my knowledge, our dear Ichigo here used a technique that, while finishing off Aizen, should have cost Ichigo his spiritual powers entirely," UnoHana explained. There were several gasps and looks of disbelief. "Ichigo, did you really?" Rukia asked slowly. He looked too, and she could see the solemn look in his eyes. "You idiot," she said, her smile sad and her eyes shining. "But why does he look like that? I mean, I can't feel his spiritual pressure at all, but he still has the hollow mask and Bankai?" Renji remarked in confusion. "Ah, right, you all wouldn't know about that," UnoHana realized. "You see, Ichigo and Aizen both gained such power that, before it ended, each had spiritual pressure so powerful that most can't even comprehend it." Dead silence came over the group. "Are you kidding me?" Renji asked dubiously. "He's so powerful that we can't even feel it. What sense does that make?" "Indeed," Yuri remarked with a frown. "That is hardly how pressure is supposed to work." Well, believe it or not, it's true. I'd ask Ichigo to lower it some, but some of you might die, UnoHana warned, far too cheerfully. Besides, as you said, he clearly still has his powers. And then some, but UnoHana chose not to add that part. He's not speaking, Chad observed idly. Why? Yeah, I've been wondering that myself, UnoHana answered, cupping his chin speculatively. Maybe he's taking this chance to reinvent himself? Giving up the rude hoodlum act for the mysterious brooding type like Captain Kuchi. Shut it, hat and clogs. Everyone looked to Ichigo in surprise. His voice was the same but had a deep echo to it. UnoHana himself blinked at the surprised response and tried to reply. Tried. He was fairly alarmed when no words came out. His vocal cords were fine though, he could feel that. But he couldn't breathe through his mouth. Looking to the others, he could see their stunned, borderline horrified reactions as he reached a hand up to his face and realized with alarm why he couldn't open his mouth. He had no mouth. Thankfully, he didn't have to scream. While unnerved, he remained mostly calm as he looked back at Ichigo. The horned entity stared back. UnoHana pointed to his missing orifice, tilting his head inquisitively. By Ichigo's lack of response, he was debating about not helping him just yet. But with some reluctance, Ichigo raised his arm and stuck out a single metal finger, making a clawing motion at the air in the general of UnoHana's mouth. Gah! UnoHana gasped for proper breath, mainly just relieved to have his mouth back again, licking his lips with renewed appreciation. Okay. That's why you don't talk. Good to know, UnoHana said with a thumbs up, masking just how unnerved he was by what just happened. He just erased his mouth, Yuria said numbly. Orihime had a very strange, thoughtful expression up until now before she gave an assuring smile to the Quincy. Don't worry, Yuria. Ichigo would never do something like that on us. On purpose, I mean. Ichigo's horn slowly pointed to Renji. Well, most of us, Rukia remarked, fighting off a smirk. Despite the changes, this definitely felt more and more like Ichigo by the second. Renji stepped back in alarm, bringing up his hands to somehow shield his mouth. What the hell, Strawberry? You stay away from my mouth. Silence overcame the group and Ichigo's stare could not have gotten any blanker. Shut up, Renji said in defeated, gritting his teeth in embarrassment. But Ichigo's gaze remained on Renji, but not quite on his eyes. Then, his eyes trailed over to Chad and his injured state, wandering to Yuria's hands, before finally moving to the large wrappings around Rukia's torso. Ichigo? Rukia asked in concern. He flexed his hands and the metal creaked ever so slightly. Everyone felt something. Perhaps it the feeling of was impossible to sense spiritual pressure moving over them, maybe it was something else. But they all felt it as the injured of the group suddenly jolted in place. What the dash? Hey, my wounds are healed, Renji said in bewilderment, touching at his sides, the bandages coming loose. Chad flexed his leg, finding his limp was gone and his own medical wrappings had come loose. While confused, he simply picked up the crutch and placed it over his shoulder. The Quincy of the group rubbed his healed hands in fascination before he noticed something. Ichigo? You might have forgotten something, Yuri reminded, looking away while pointing to Rukia. Said Shinigami was blushing a bit as the cast on her arm fell away and she awkwardly clutched her chest wrapping, covering the bare side of her torso. A little warning, Ichigo. And since when do you know healing techniques? Yes, where did you learn that? UnoHana murmured, eyes narrowed in interest. Ichigo promptly ignored them all, walking right up to Rukia, who looked up at him in confusion until... Rip. Ichigo started to rip a large strip of his gray clothes. Rukia hardly had time to process the strange action before he placed it over her shoulder. Rukia watched with bafflement as the fabric folded around her to help cover her modesty. Thank you? Rukia gave, appreciating the sentiment even if it felt a bit strange for some reason. Ichigo gave her a brief smile behind the mask, and it reached his eyes. Isn't that made of his erasure? Renji asked thoughtfully. I'm choosing not to think about that, Rukia said pointedly. Orihime stared at the scene with surprise and confusion, but some guilt as well. She was the lone member of them that didn't need healing. Ichigo looked to her suddenly, and she blinked before holding up her hands. It's okay, Ichigo. You don't need to rip off any more of your clothes for me. Her friends gave her deadpan stares at her choice of words while UnoHana snickered a bit. I mean, perhaps the lady protests too much, and Mr. Kurosaki? Ichigo laid a single hand loosely on the black zangetsu. UnoHana wisely chose to change the subject, lest the loose grip become tight. I'm sure all of us are confused about what is going on with Ichigo. None more so than Ichigo himself, but we should head to. They were suddenly somewhere else. What? Rukia said in surprise, all of them jerking in alarm at the sudden location shift. Where are? Karakura? But is it the real or the fake one? Chad questioned, looking to UnoHana. We're still in Soul Society, so definitely the real one, the exile answered, tilting his head when the half-Mexican continued to stare, but to UnoHana's left. He followed the gaze and his eyes went wide. Where did Ichigo go? All eyes looked from UnoHana to the impossibly blank space next to him, where a certain horned god should be. What, did he learn healing and stealth while we weren't looking? Renji said in annoyance as they looked around in search of their friend. He went that way, Orihime called, pointing to a corner in the street near them. I saw his cloak. We should go after him, UnoHana said with a frown. There's no telling what effect his very presence might have on humans. They rounded the corner and found themselves met with a grisly and unsettling sight. Ichigo was in the middle of the street, his back to them and facing a long swath of human corpses. Is this what you meant? Rukia asked, paling at the implications. No, this wasn't Ichigo, UnoHana answered with a grimace. Aizen came through here. The ascended being looked over the street with solemn eyes as the group rejoined with him, the silence unsettling for them all. They're all dead, Orihime said softly, taking in the depressing sight. But perhaps she could undo this? Save these poor souls? Worse, I'm afraid, UnoHana said sadly, the ex-captain tilting his hat. Their souls were completely destroyed by Aizen's presence. His Ryatsu was just too powerful for them to be near him and survive in any shape or form, he explained, causing them to grimace at that horrifying notion, only now realizing the full extent of what Aizen's transformation had done. UnoHana watched Ichigo solemnly, expecting that the young man was grieving over the lives he couldn't save. But Ichigo always had a habit of breaking expectations though. The masked being raised his arms, holding out the gauntlet-covered limbs out like he was about to embrace something. Ichigo? What are you? Yuria asked, growing silent as the purple glow of the gauntlets grew greater. The group watched in wonder as the bodies were covered in a mist of blue and violet raysure. But UnoHana's eyes became wide with incomprehension as he felt something that could not be right. That's not possible, he whispered, walking forward numbly. Ichigo lowered his arms as the event dissipated, but UnoHana never stopped in his stride. UnoHana, what is it? Yuria asked as they approached his kneeling form next to one of the bodies. UnoHana made a shushing motion and, after a moment, Yuria heard it too. They're alive? The Quincy asked in surprise. But you said Rukia started before blinking. Ichigo brought them back from soul destruction. Ichigo made no reaction to the conversation, looking off to the side and idly venturing off. Isn't that a good thing? Chad asked, getting the sense that they didn't think so. In itself, yes it is. A miracle, in fact. However, what he just did with a wave of his hands is strictly impossible, UnoHana said in a serious tone. He restored souls that were destroyed, spiritually disintegrated. That's not something that can be done. And yet here they are. Unconscious but alive. The fact confused and troubled UnoHana as a growing suspicion gnawed at the back of his head. Ichigo, where are you going now? Rukia called after him, seeing him looking down an alley. He hummed, but it sounded more like a growl of consideration as she and Renji caught up to him first and peered down the alley. There was the body of Jin Ikamaru, laid over a boulder of rubble, Ranjika Matsumoto kneeling over it and hovering over Jin with sad, teary eyes. Oh. It's him, Renji said, hiding distaste for Ranjika's sake. Ranjiku, Orihime whispered in concern. Please, Just's already dead, Ranjika whispered in request. Ichigo looked to Orihime, who met his gaze in confusion. You want me to Tatri and revive him? She asked skeptically. Ichigo nodded. What? You idiot, why would you try to save him? He's one of the traitors, remember? Renji reminded with a glare of disapproval to Ichigo. The horned god didn't even acknowledge his words, just staring at Orihime. I'll try. But I don't know if I can, after however long it's been, Orihime said doubtfully. You can. Oriheim startled at Ichigo's voice, confident and assuring. With that, she stepped forward to the other side of Jin, while Ranjiku stared on with disbelieving, confused eyes. I reject, she whispered, summoning her fairies and barrier. That as Ichigo? Ranjiku whispered slowly, staring at the masked being. She felt as if she was staring at something that wasn't really there, sensing not even a speck of spiritual pressure, just like Aizen. Ichigo, are you sure about this? Rukia asked cautiously. I'm sure he has his reasons, UnoHana said idly. Ichigo groaned in frustration and everyone winced as a dull pain bore into their heads, and images flashed through their minds. Jin betraying Aizen, Jin being killed by Aizen, and more that they couldn't make sense of. All accompanied by the feeling from these images that they shouldn't attack the supposed traitor. What was that? Yuri demanded in disbelief. Did you just force those images into our heads? Ichigo looked around the group, apparently surprised by his own actions, but not unhappy with the result. Well, that's one way to get around the talking problem, UnoHana said, sticking his pinky in his ear. Rukia shook it off, glancing up at Ichigo. You think we can trust him? The question was without accusation or reservation. Oriheim spoke up with a regretful tone. I can restore his body, but he's still. Ranjiku looked like she was about to tear up anew, before almost drawing her Zanpakuto as Ichigo was suddenly in front of Jin's body. What are you dash? Ichigo kicked Jin in the stomach. Ugh! Jin exclaimed, suddenly sitting up in pain, but very much alive and well. Gah! What hit me? He groaned as rubbed his head, his normal smile gone in bewilderment. He looked up at Ichigo's demonic visage and tilted his head. Slowly, he glanced to a gobsmacked Ranjiku. Well, Ranjiku is here, so this can't be hell, Jin remarked as he looked up at Ichigo. Kurosaki kid? Ichigo nodded. Huh. Guess you won? Did you bring me back from death, or did I dream the whole dying thing? Jin questioned idly. Ichigo glanced to Oriheim. Jin looked to the orange-haired girl, his eyes opening slightly. Thanks. Sorry about whatever you had to put up with in Las Noches. Oriheim could only blink. You are too calm for this, Ranjiku blurted out suddenly, making Jin lean away. You have so much to explain, and you're just sitting there, like. Jin looked to her again and smiled. Why are you smiling? Ranjiku asked, trying to be angry, sad, even anything but thrilled and happy. Simple. You're safe. That's all I cared about, Jin answered, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. Ranjiku could only stare for a moment before she latched onto him with a desperate hug. Ichigo and Oriheim silently moved away, leaving the two to their emotional reunion. You sure about this? UnoHana asked with a hum. He blinked as Ichigo held up a sword for him to take. It was Jin's Zanpakuto. UnoHana stared at it before chuckling as he took the blade. How shrewd of you, Mr. Kurosaki. Well, there's that at least, Renji said with a sigh. You know we're probably just going to have lock him up after all this, right? Ichigo grunted uncaringly. I'm going to interpret that as it being Soul Society's issue to figure it out, and no problem of ours, Yuri remarked. Of which I agree. Who knows, maybe the head captain knew he was a double agent, Rukia remarked with a shrug. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing in all of this. Ichigo looked at her so fast. It was like a single limb flash step, and pointed to himself. Rukia rolled her eyes. You don't count, you've been the weirdest part of my life well before this. She stiffened as Ichigo patted her on the head, gaining a tick mark on her forehead. What now? Chad asked suddenly. We should probably head back to the fake Karakura in the world of the living, Kisuke said, looking to Oriheim. I hate to ask more, but I think they could use some help with the injured. From you and maybe from Ichigo. Images went into their heads, the many defeats and slaughters Aizen had committed against the captains and Vizards. Yes, Ichigo, I was there, UnoHana said as he saw his own conventional defeat against Aizen, along with Yorichi and Isshin. Wait. Isshin. UnoHana looked to Ichigo, who was already staring at him. In UnoHana's thoughts, he saw some memory of the exterior of the Kurosaki household, Isshin with his daughters. He decided that was answer enough and didn't say anything on the matter. So, who wants to summon the Senkamin? Renji asked, hand already on his own Zanpakuto. Well, this certainly is turning out to be interesting, Jin remarked as he stepped up to the group with Ranjaku, unsettling most of them. You're taking this awfully well, UnoHana observed idly. Jin shrugged. I've been planning to kill Aizen before anyone. I've seen enough that nothing much phases me anymore. UnoHana couldn't exactly refute that, and it occurred to him that Jin might be aware of any leftover secrets from Aizen. Don't suppose you've got any idea what's happened to Ichigo? Jin shrugged. Nothing you haven't already figured out yourself, I'm sure, he answered cryptically. UnoHana glanced to the horned god and let his eyes linger on the gauntlets Ichigo wore with a strange glow that reminded him eerily of the Hogyoku. Retsu wore a sad frown as she finished healing Hiyori, her mind wandering to her other patients, fellow captains and their Vizard allies. If not for some arrogance or possibly sadism on Aizen's part, a great many of them would be dead instead of almost dead. There was hardly a captain or vice-captain that wasn't in bad shape. Never had Soul Society came so close to losing almost all of its higher officers, or all her oldest comrades. Aizen had truly been a nightmare, one that had almost snuffed them out. He still might, in fact. They had no word from Kisuke UnoHana yet if Aizen was defeated or... She didn't like this current situation, to be honest. Aizen planned on a near-paranoid level. She wouldn't be surprised if he had a small force ordered to clean up after he left the fake Karakura town. While she knew she could deal with almost anything that could be sent against them, she didn't like risking her patience without more help from the 4th Division. Perhaps she'd just have to deal with any threats quickly. Hey, UnoHana? Shinji said from where he sat next to Hiyori, a slightly pained grin on his face. Whatever conversation they would have had ended when they felt several spiritual pressures arriving. Looking out, they spied a Senkuman in the nearby distance. They eyed it cautiously until they saw Rukia, Renji, and UnoHana first emerge. There's Kisuke, Kensei noted gruffly, seeing the genius's all too familiar hat and coat. And I think those are Ichigo's friends, Rose added, seeing the group of humans and Shinigami. But where's it? Shinji started, only to stop as the next figure came out. Now he was worried. He almost didn't notice the changed color scheme at first. It was impossible to not recognize Ichigo's Bankai. But that horn mask and the spiritual pressure, or lack of any that he could sense. This is either really good or really bad. As Shinage? Hiyori called weakly, surprising him at her sudden return to consciousness. He's back, isn't he? He won? She asked softly, her eyes just barely open, a weak grin on her fanged face. Shinji blinked at that. It hadn't really set in yet, but if Ichigo and Kisuke were back and not in a hurry, then Aizen had to have been dealt with. He was about to look up when he noticed a pair of feet and a gray cloak right next to him. Shinji! Love called out in alarm as Shinji's head snapped up, hand towards his Zanpakuto despite the pain he was in. There the gauntlet Ichigo stood, looming over him, staring right down into Shinji's eyes. The horns were almost as sharp as those piercing brown orbs. Shinji suddenly got the idea of what it was like for a human to stare down a bull. His gaze stayed on the masked being, as if waiting for a strike that would never come. He could see that several swords were pointed at the gray-cloaked person, but Ichigo didn't even seem to notice them. In the same way someone doesn't notice an ant or a fly. The longer he stared, the more Shinji got the feeling of being so very, very small. Ichigo? Isn't that you? Hiyori's voice broke the silence. She was squinting her eyes up at him, her vision blurry and consciousness barely hanging on. Her question had broken the staring contest, and Shinji took a deep breath to calm himself now as Ichigo turned his gaze down to the short blonde. At Shinji's slow nod, his fellow Vizards put away their swords while watching Ichigo nervously. I think that's the 6th time he's been asked that, Kisuke noted with a small grin as he arrived with the others. Might as well as paint the name on him, he joked lightly. He silenced his quibs when Ichigo glanced at him. Shutting UnoHana up. Now that's impressive, Lisa remarked with a hum. Lady, you have no idea, Renji said with a scowl at that unpleasant memory. UnoHana. Aizen is defeated? UnoHana asked with a frown, glancing at Ichigo and wondering why the sudden change. Ichigo gave off a low humming growl, making several people wince or clutch their heads as grotesque images of a bifurcated Aizen ran through their minds. Yehei does that now, Rukia commented at everyone's confused stares. We're hoping it's temporary, Yuryu added in, rubbing his temple lightly to clear away the small headache that was forming. Ichigo said nothing as he crouched down by Hiyori. She weakly held up a shaking hand, eyes coming in and out of focus. He reached a hand out to her, until another fell on his arm and held him back. Retsu gave Ichigo a stern and searching look as his heavy sight fell upon her. "It's okay, Captain UnoHana," UnoHana assured. "I think I know what he's doing." Retsu's gaze did not waver, but she did remove her fingers from Ichigo's limb. With that, the horned god looked to Hiyori and carefully grasped her hand. Hiyori stiffened, and her eyes were suddenly clear. "You're dumbus," she whispered before she started chuckling. "Hiyori?" Shinji asked in concern. Said smaller blonde suddenly started laughing, hard covering her face with her arm. "Oh, Shinji! You should have seen it!" Ichigo threw Aizen by the face. "Wait, he did what now?" Renji asked in surprise, looking to Ichigo. "You did what now?" "Well, that is our action," UnoHana said carefully. "Oh," the look on Aizen's face was almost worth getting cut in half, Hiyori said with a smirk as she gingerly sat up. "Easy, you're still healing," Lisa cautioned. Yeah, I'm feeling that. Don't know what Strawberry here did or how, but I am still sore as hell," Hiyori said with a grimace. "And my legs don't want to move right now. At all." "Interesting," Retsu said with a hum as she placed hands over Hiyori's midsection, green raysure exuding from her palm. "It's not healing Kido, but it's certainly not what Miss Inoue does." The fourth captain glanced over and saw that Orihime had already gone off to heal the other Vizards more than healing Kido could. It was interesting for her. Normally in the past, there were times when healers of the 4th squad were trying to do patch jobs and keep patients stable until she could arrive. It was interesting to be the one doing the patch jobs instead, comparatively. "Hey, UnoHana?" "Thanks," Hiyori said gruffly. She didn't look up from her examination. "Why are you thanking me? You must know that a thank you isn't necessary for saving a friend." Hiyori frowned. "Fool. What makes you think we're friends? You really shouldn't be insulting your healer like that." Shinji's eyes dilated at the sound of that voice, looking up to see the face of the man that butchered Hiyori, Aizen's left hand, Jin Ikamaru. "You!" Shinji exclaimed, rising to his feet. Ranjaku tensed, but Jin didn't even try to defend himself as Shinji pulled out his weapon. Or he would have, if Ichigo hadn't grabbed the sword-wielding hand, pulling Shinji back down to his knees. "Hey! Ichigo, what the hell out, that hurts, you bastard!" Shinji cursed as Ichigo forced the sword back into the sheath. "Why are you dash?" "Shinji," Hiyori spoke up in an annoyed voice. "You're giving me a headache." Shinji stared in disbelief at her rather tame reaction to the man that had cut her down. Hiyori looked back up at Jin with a frown. "I don't get what's going on with Ichigo, but I got enough from that weird mind movie shit he was doing. This snake of an ass has been trying to kill Aizen a lot longer than us," Hiyori remarked. "You couldn't have tried it sooner though?" Jin shrugged. "You have any idea how long it took me to find out the weakness to Kyoka Sujetsu?" That had everyone's attention, even UnoHana. "Oh? It actually had a weak spot?" he asked in interest. "Yep. All you had to do was not be under an illusion, and be touching the sword," Jin explained casually. An empty pause greeted him. "Now, between how strong and paranoid Captain Aizen is, I'm still going to kick you in the face when my legs start working right," Hiyori said with a scowl. "There is a line of people who deserve a free swing at me," Jin accepted with a shrug. "If it makes you feel any better, I put a hole in Aizen's chest and stole the Hogyoku." "And that didn't kill him?" Love asked morbidly. "Nope. Got me killed though," Jin said far too causally. Before anyone could question that, Ichigo suddenly rose back to his full height and looked over the other Vizards, and saw that Orihime had finished healing Hachijin's arm. "Well, look at that. Now we have 3 master healers. And a questionable 4th, UnoHana mused before glancing to Ichigo. He was already gone. "He does that too," Chad remarked coolly. "Hey Curly? Mind giving me that crutch?" Hiyori requested demandingly. Chad silently acquiesced to her request, handing her the walking aid. "Thanks." "You probably shouldn't be walking," Shinji reminded in concern. "Idiot, I just want something to clobber you with," Hiyori remarked with a snort. "Kisuk, what the hell happened to Ichigo?" Shinji asked under his breath, still getting over a little fright he felt when Ichigo first arrived. "I'm not sure," UnoHana answered idly. No one was sure they believed him. UnoHana and UnoHana suddenly shared a look, a silent conversation forming between them as the blonde exile nodded in acceptance. Oriheim, Hachigen. If you feel you have the energy, would you be kind enough to head to another group of injured and aid them? UnoHana requested. Of course, Oriheim accepted with a determined look. I should have enough energy to be of assistance, Hachi said humbly. UnoHana nodded before vanishing in a flash step. So is being that creepy part of the cover-or? Rukia asked with a frown toward Jin. Jin had his usual smile about himself. No, my charm is natural. Ranjika sighed, having no words for the utter insanity that her life had become. Meanwhile, as he walked, Ichigo made no move to acknowledge that UnoHana was now following behind him from a small distance, but she was very sure he was aware of her presence. After all, she wasn't trying to hide herself, only observe and interfere if she believed it necessary. The transcended being's Ryatsu was beyond her abilities to sense, but his very presence gave off a strange sensation, the feeling in it almost ineffable. Still, that was not what had her immediate interest. Years as a warrior and a medic had given Retsu a very keen insight into the art of interpreting body language, facial or otherwise. And Ichigo's body language was unnaturally calm, so much so that it felt wrong, especially compared to how he had been before. To go through such battles, to face such foes, to change so completely it should have some effect on him, but his body seemed more relaxed than she had ever recalled the young man to be. It was as if nothing around him could bother him anymore. She wasn't sure how to interpret that. The feeling of a powerful but dying hollow signature brought her attention to their present location. They grew closer to the source, and UnoHana eventually found Ichigo standing over the body of a blonde Aaronkar with dark skin and, in Retsu's humble opinion, a very skimpy release state. She was deeply injured by 2 stab wounds, and likely wouldn't survive. You intend to save her? Retsu asked neutrally, glancing to the horned god. Why? Ichigo didn't look to her, but the image of Aizen's dead body did pulse in her mind again. The war is over, Retsu understood. I hope you understand others might not approve of you helping her. Now Ichigo looked to her, and Retsu felt those eyes, the same eyes that once challenged all of Soul Society, rest on her. And in that moment she knew that he did not care what others thought of this action, admirable, but concerning. Yet he let her follow him here. Despite knowing she couldn't sense his power, he made no effort to lose her trail. It didn't matter if he could have shaken her off, just that he didn't try. Unlike some, Retsu recognized an olive branch when she saw it. Very well, she said in acceptance. Ichigo nodded and crouched down to lay a hand on the Espada's shoulder, the air over her body rippling with violet distortions. Retsu hummed as she knelt and observed the process, trying to understand it. Without being able to feel his rapier at work, it was difficult to study. Oriheim and Hachigen's technique each worked to similar ends. Instead of truly healing an injury, they undid the wound and made it as if it had never happened. But whatever Ichigo was doing, it was different. The wounds healed one at a time, but they didn't close or reform the missing tissue. Rather, the wounds were replaced by undamaged skin, with only faint pale scar tissue to mark that the injury had ever existed. Both wounds were dealt with in an instant, but they were each their own instant. Others wouldn't have noticed it, but UnoHana's keen eyes perceived even the minuscule blip of time it took between each wound being treated. He retracted his hand and glanced to her meaningfully, horns and eyes directing themselves to her hands. Retsu almost smiled. Wanting her to confirm that he hadn't made an error, that was perhaps the most normal and reassuring action Ichigo could have done. Her hands came over the Espada woman and was pleased with what she sensed. She's fine physically, but she will need to rest and regain her strength after this. Ichigo nodded and suddenly looked out into the ruined city. Her special smile came into place as she followed his gaze. Now, would you 3 kindly step forth? She called out as both of them rose, stepping away from the unconscious woman. There was a brief silence before 3 more female Aaronkars leapt out of hiding, ready to battle. Or that was the image they tried to convey. Their burns, ragged breaths, and trembling bodies told another story. Who the hell are you? Apache asked with a growl towards the horned being. And what are you doing to Lady Harabelle? He's an Aaronkar, obviously, Mila Rose stated, looking at his mask. Gray or white, it was definitely a hollow's. But why is he with a Shinigami? And why can't we sense any of his spiritual pressure? Sun-sung wondered out loud. Ichigo hummed. Something about it was unpleasant, and conveyed all UnoHana needed to know. She braced herself just in time. Ichigo dropped his power back to detectable levels. All three Arankars went crashing down to the ground, barely staying on their knees. What is this? Mila asked, swallowing numbly, her body feeling ready to be torn limb from limb. Shit. Apache cursed, feeling like she was about to be crushed. It was like with Aizen, but even worse. Sun-sung trembled as she forced her gaze up and noted that the Shinigami woman was weathering the weight with all the discomfort one displayed by a breeze of wind in their face. The unbearable weight left, and they could breathe again, could pick themselves up again. They watched Ichigo with fear and dread, knowing they would be dead now if he attacked. What do you want? Sun-sung asked quickly. If you were paying attention, you would know that we were healing your superior, Retsu informed with a graceful smile, as if she hadn't felt the impossible amount of spiritual pressure crash down on her. As for what we want, well. She trailed off, and Ichigo took that as a sign to answer in his own way. They froze as they found their minds assaulted and shown a rapid series of images. Aizen fighting a man with orange hair, who became this very being before them after cutting him down. Then, alarmingly, they saw the skies of Hueco Mundo and Las Noches itself. Go home. The words were more seen in their minds rather than heard in any fashion. Go home? Mila repeated skeptically. You're letting us go, just like that? He raised a gauntlet, and they tensed. UnoHana watched as the undetectable racier washed over the three and ate away their wounds until it was as if they had not even seen a battle that day. They each inhaled sharply, air filling their unburnt lungs. Go home. The trio jerked at the repeated order. We're not leaving without Mistress Harabelle, Apache said defiantly. Did we give the impression we were going to keep her? Retsu asked in amusement. I believe we are done here, Ichigo. Ichigo nodded and vanished, Retsu flashed stepping away as well, leaving the trio in disbelief for a moment before moving to their mistress's side. Retsu was relieved when, upon reaching her location, she found Ichigo already waiting for her. Since I have indulged you, I hope you will return the favor, Retsu remarked. Ichigo nodded, and she suspected he already knew where she intended to go. Tell me, Ichigo Kurosaki? Are you content with this? Retsu asked, feigning idleness as they walked. Ichigo cocked his head but otherwise didn't react to the question. I'm referring to this state you're in, for lack of a better word, she said, looking him up and down deliberately. You're currently unable to contain your powers or otherwise transform to a less powerful state, correct? Ichigo nodded in affirmation. I assumed as much. If it was possible, I believe you would have by now, given the issues you are facing, Retsu mused. You do realize you can no longer take on your human body? I fear not even a Jigai could handle housing your soul. Ichigo shrugged. That was it, he just shrugged. Their conversation ended when a burning smell reached their nose as they walked through the scorched crater. They came to the lip of a smaller, deeper crater with a body in it. They both stared down grimly at the form of the head captain. Most might be surprised that she hadn't come to Yamamoto's aid first and foremost. But she knew the head captain well, and knew his spiritual pressure better than most. Despite everything, he was stable and in no danger of dying, where others had very much been close to departing from their current incarnations. Despite that, she frowned in concern as she leapt down to the side of the ancient Shinigami. Battered, wounded, drained, charred and missing an arm. The worst she had ever seen him. She looked back up at Ichigo, unsurprised to see he was already right behind her. But he wasn't looking at her, but at Yamamoto's body with intensity. She turned to the head captain again, and was pleased to see that his body was no longer blackened. But as the body slowly healed, she noticed that the arm did not return. Was the return of limbs beyond his abilities? She met his gaze again, and one look in his eyes told her she didn't need to vocalize the question. And her answer was the mental image of Yamamoto, looking his normal self, with both arms. You won't return his arm? Retsu realized in surprise and suspicion. Why? Pride. Retsu winced minutely at the unpleasant feeling of having the words engraved into her consciousness. She had endured worse, yes, but this was a new and unexpected kind of pain. She suddenly understood why he didn't use this method to communicate. But even worse was the meaning of Ichigo's word. The pride of the head captain was great. Even it was just letting a subordinate help him, or making a request to an ally, it would be hard for the old man to bring himself to ask such a thing. Ultimately, though, she wasn't sure if Ichigo was respecting or mocking Yamamoto's stubbornness. Perhaps both. Retsu looked back up and found that Ichigo was already gone. She almost expected that. Meanwhile. So, Jin, Shinji spoke up dryly. Did it really take this long for you to find a chance to grab his damn sword? Interesting choice of words, Lisa mused. Jin poked open one eye. I vaguely recall him making some speech to you about never trusting anyone. Aoki, point, Shinji conceded begrudgingly. I hate to say it, but at least it sounds like he got a better shot at the bastard than we did, Hiyori said bitterly. Why'd the berry save you anyway? Wish I knew, Jin mused with a shrug. The girl healed me, he kicked me alive, and I was right as rain. Had kicked you alive? Love asked with incomprehension. I was dead, Kurosaki kid kicked me, and I was back, Jin explained, glancing to Ichigo's friends. Did I leave anything else out? You're being far too calm about coming back from the dead. But other than that, no, Rinji summarized with a deadpan expression, and I still don't exactly know why Ichigo wanted to save you either. Yeah, Ichigo isn't that talkative right now, UnoHana agreed, giving Jin a pointed look. You know Soul Society isn't going to just let what you did go, right? The unusually silent Ranjika looked away with Jin just cocking his head in acceptance. Jin Ikamaru. The silver-haired Reaper turned, as did everyone else, to see a surprisingly calm and healed Toshiro walking toward him, albeit with one sleeve of his clothes missing. Captain Hitsugaya. Ichigo was kind enough to inform me, in his own way, of what your true intentions have been in joining Aizen, Toshiro said as he approached. Oh? Jin asked as Ranjika looked between them both warily. Yes, and I understand. I truly do, Toshiro stated evenly. That said? Jin made no effort to dodge as Toshiro leapt up to punch him in the nose hard. Jin! Ranjiku explained in alarm as he fell backwards, over the rock he'd been sitting on. It's fine, I deserve that at least, Jin waved away, wiping away a small bit of blood. If it makes you feel any better, I already died for hurting your girl. But the Kurosaki boy decided to drag me back before I could move on. Shut up, Toshiro growled through gritted teeth. I just want to know, right now. Why did Momo have to be dragged into this? Jin raised a brow as he straightened himself. I only did it because she was the one Aizen set up for all this. As for why her? Who can really say? He made it seem like it was just because she would be the easiest to twist around his finger, more or less. Toshiro gritted his teeth and balled his fists. I'm not pretending to be a saint here, Jin said idly. If you want another swing or 10, take it. I'd love to, Toshiro admitted coldly with balled fists. But I'm not cruel enough to needlessly beat on someone my lieutenant deeply cares for. Captain Ranjika said softly as Jin lost some of his smile. Toshiro sighed as his temper cooled. Momo couldn't untangle her heart from Aizen, a traitor in all ways. I can't exactly blame Ranjiku, when you were trying to take him down all this time. Jin said nothing for a moment before his smile became a bit more relaxed. It might just be where I'm sitting, Captain Hitsugaya, but you look like you got a bit taller since last time. Toshiro took no happiness in that praise, but his anger didn't rise anymore. Instead, he sighed and turned to everyone else. Now, will someone properly explain what happened to Kurosaki? I thought Ahalo was about to eat me when I first saw him. The immediate aftermath of the Winter War went smoothly, despite how unsettling Ichigo's allies found his new state of being. Of course, some jumped to the wrong conclusion. Stay back, you hollow bastard! Omida yelled, standing protectively in front of Soifan with his Zanpakuto drawn. Ichigo looked at the man and distinctly remembered beating him in one hit, without Bankai. With that in mind, he calmly stepped forward. I said stay back. Omida exclaimed, swinging his Zanpakuto at Ichigo, going right for the shoulder but fully expecting an attempt to block or dodge. Ichigo didn't dodge or block. Omida stared in shock when his blade stopped harmlessly against the shoulder, unable to even scratch him. Ichigo glanced at it with an exceeding amount of patience. TCH. I'll show you! Smash dash. Oh, give it a rest, Soifan called, sitting slumped against the wall, out of energy and barely conscious after all her wounds. That's obviously Kurosaki. Ichigo tilted his head to glance at her. Soifan squinted, wondering why she got the distinct image of him greeting with a yo to her. But his clothes are different colors. And he has a hollow mask on, Omida pointed out. And he can obviously kill us both right now if he wants. Now stop being an idiot before he kills you by accident, Soifan ordered flippantly. Captain Omida said, almost whining. Ichigo ignored the large man as he approached Soifan, crouching down next to her. Aizen dead? She asked bluntly. He nodded in confirmation before looking her up and down. Is Lady Yaruchi alright? Was her next question, watching his sharp horns carefully. Specifically alright because she knew she was alive. This close, Soifan would know if Yaruchi had been slain. She grimly wondered if that shock would have been enough to kill her in this state. Something like a growl escaped from Kurosaki as he reached to pick Soifan up, one arm around her back and another under her knees. Hey! You can't move her, she's too hurt, Omida protested urgently. It's fine, Soifan said, her voice regaining some strength as she eyed Ichigo suspiciously. Surprisingly so. What did you just do, Kurosaki? He didn't answer, he just stood up and held her before turning to. Soifan stiffened and realized they were suddenly somewhere else. Still in the fake Karakura town, and she quickly realized, among allies. Ichigo. Oriheim greeted with a smile. She wanted to wave, but she was currently focusing on healing someone. Namely? Lady Yaruchi, Soifan realized in relief. Soifan. The goddess of Flash returned with a grin. You're okay. Good, I was beginning to get worried about you. I even asked Oriheim to heal up my leg so I could go check on you. Your leg? Soifan said in alarm and realization as she instantly scrambled out of Ichigo's arms and rushed over to Yaruchi, kneeling by her side. Aizen did this? Honestly, I got off lucky compared to most. Kisuke would have a concussion right now if not for Oriheim, Yaruchi assured before taking on a playful look. But enough about that, I didn't take you as one for being carried like a princess, Soifan. The 2nd Division captain instantly blushed in embarrassment. That was only because she started to protest before abruptly standing up. She suddenly began touching herself all over, searching for injuries. Then she looked to her arm or lack thereof. If it had returned, she might have decided this was a dream. She rounded on Ichigo in bewilderment. He stood there with his arms crossed, and despite the mask, she got the distinct impression he was amused by her antics. You healed me? Soifan realized in confusion. Since when can you do healing arts? That is something that came with his makeover, Yaruchi supplied. We think he's something like what Aizen was trying to become. In case you didn't notice, we can't feel his Ryatsu. Soifan blinked. She thought she had just been too tired and wounded to notice anyone besides Yaruchi's spiritual pressure, but no, she couldn't sense him at all. As the head of the stealth division, that was both alarming and interesting since Kurosaki was clearly still in Bankai, and wearing his Vizard mask and normally very poor at hiding his presence. He, also can't speak right now, Oriheim supplied with an awkward smile. Or he could, but something weird might happen. Soifan looked at the human with a furrowed brow. What do you mean, something weird? Ichigo sighed, gathering their attention as he leaned down to grab a stone from the ground. He casually tossed it at Soifan, who caught it in narrowed-eyed confusion. Melt. Soifan stiffed at his voice. It was his, but with it was something else, something more. Like the wind of a hurricane stirring up waves in a pool of magma. Her eyes shot down to the rock and watched in fascination as it did just that, it melted. But the stone didn't turn to lava or even to water. It simply oozed apart into a stone-colored soup that flowed off her fingers. She looked back and he was suddenly right in front of her. She tensed as he reached out and made a lazy slashing motion at her hand. Her eyes went wide as the liquids leaped up from the ground and back into her hand, reforming the same solid stone. See? He says stuff, and it happens. Apparently, he made Kisuke's mouth disappear, Yaruchi informed, despite having watched the scene with her own fascination. That brought Soifan out of her stupor, dropping the stone. I would have rather seen that as a demonstration, she drawled. I can see how this would make conversation harder. Oh, he hasn't shown you the alternative yet? Yaruchi said with a chuckle. Come on, sit down. Orihime should be able to restore that arm of yours. She can't? Everyone looked at Ichigo in surprise. I can't? Orihime repeated in response, getting a head shake. What do you mean, she can't, Ichigo? Yoruichi asked with a frown. Look, I get that you didn't restore the old man's arm to not offend his pride, but she suddenly stopped before glaring blankly at Soifan. Little B, if you try to turn down getting your arm restored out of some petty indignation, I am going to make you redo all your basic training, 3 times over. Soifan actually paled at the threat. Ichigo grunted, suddenly behind Yoruichi. Oh, so you prefer to be behind a woman, Ichigo? Yoruichi teased over her shoulder, grinning at her latest student. Ichigo rolled his eyes, reaching up to grab the top of Yoruichi's head. She would have made another joke about this if he hadn't turned her head to face Soifan. She got the impression he wanted her to look at the space where the arm should be. She felt something from Ichigo's gauntlet. She decided to not think about it too deeply right now and welcome whatever information he was trying to convey. She saw the image of Soifan with both arms, but one of them slowly turning to bones. Then she watched the rot be undone only for it to restart again. The image looped several times for Yoruichi before she batted Ichigo's hand away. I get it, Yoruichi said with a sigh, looking apologetically at Soifan. I think he's saying that whatever was destroying your arm would be restored with it. Why, I don't know, but that's what it looked like. Soifan nodded in acceptance as she glanced to the ground. Thank you, Kurosaki. I'd rather not relive that again, she said sincerely, looking back. He was gone. Soifan was far too annoyed that he was able to do that to her. Where did he? Someone grabbed her by the back of her clothes. She tried to spin to stab them, but she found a distinctive gauntlet grabbing her arm. Kurosaki, what the hell? Soifan exclaimed in frustration as he casually brought her over and forced her to sit down in front of Yoruichi. Are we sure he's not an enemy now? Positive, Yoruichi said, glancing up at Ichigo. Okay, what is it? You saying Orihime can't fix it, but you can? Ichigo shook his head before pointing to Orihime and then to himself. Oh. We both need to do it. Orihime realized in surprise and maybe a bit of excitement about doing something together with him. Soifan grimaced. On one hand, getting her other arm back would be much more appealing than any replacement the 12th could give her. On the other, if this went wrong, she'd have to go through getting her arm rotted away and chopped off again. Fine, I'll give you one try, Kurosaki, she said, handing her Zanpakuto to her goddess. Lady Yoruichi? I hate to ask, but if something goes wrong? Yoruichi lost all humor from her face and nodded with a scowl as she took the blade. Ichigo, please don't make me dismember my first student, Yoruichi requested with a pointed look at the transcended being. Ichigo didn't respond. Instead, he knelt behind Soifan's shoulder and waved Orihime to come closer. The orange-haired girl did so, albeit a little uncertain of what he had in mind. Raising her hands, she summoned her barrier to form over Soifan's missing arm. Now? She asked to Ichigo. He shook his head and placed a hand on Soifan's shoulder. In one instance, Soifan's arm reformed as if it was never gone. But at the tip of her fingers was a dark Ryatsu that was already starting to turn her fingers to bones. Soifan hissed in pain. I reject. At Orihime's command, the decaying powers of Baragon were banished away and Ichigo finished restoring the fingertips once more. Soifan relaxed, looking numbly at her arm, raising it to flex the fingers. It was back. Her brain hadn't really had time to process that it had been gone earlier, and now it was back, albeit the skin was paler on her arm than the rest of her body. Still, it was a bit much to take in. She was brought out of her musing as her Zanpakuto was placed back into her hand by Yoruichi, holding it by the blade with a smile. You did good, little bee, Yoruichi said with a smile. Soifan sighed. My lady, I was barely an annoyance to Aizen in the end. Yeah, join the club. The only thing he found interesting was my legs, Yoruichi said with a grin. What? Soifan said darkly. Was there anything left of him to castrate, Kuro? She turned and found that he was truly gone this time. If it makes you feel any better, I didn't notice him leaving either, Yoruichi informed her with mock sympathy. So, Orihime, what do you? She stopped and looked at the obvious lack of Orihime in the area. I guess he took her off to help heal the others. Indeed, the remaining injured were patched up, if not fully healed by the combined efforts of Retsu, Hachijin, Orihime, and Ichigo. Granted, some wounds weren't physical. Is she going to be alright? Toshiro asked in concern. Physically, Lieutenant Hinamori is fine now, Retsu said with a frown. But I fear the harm done to her mind after what she endured. Toshiro balled his fists, close to drawing blood, as he cast his eyes down in shame. It may have been your blade that stabbed her, but it was Aizen's hand that cast the blow, Retsu reminded softly. Do not despair so great, Captain Hitsuguya. Captain UnoHana, I didn't believe she actually knew what was going on. Or if she did, she refused to believe it, Toshiro said with gritted teeth. It took a moment for them both to realize a new presence was among them. There's nothing you can do here, Kurosaki, Toshiro said, refusing to look at the Horned Lord. Not unless you can heal the mind. Ichigo hummed but made no form of comment on that subject. Instead, they both furrowed their brow, ignoring the discomfort as their minds were invaded by the image of the head captain standing in the captain meeting room back in Soul Society, which was otherwise empty. I'll assume that wasn't entirely literal, Retsu mused, turning to face Ichigo. The head captain is waiting for us? Phrasing it as a question was as much a formality as Ichigo nodding to confirm it. Kurosaki? Could you retrieve anyone to watch over Momo? Hitsuguya asked softly, looking at the transcended being. Ichigo's eyes softened as if to say that he didn't even need to ask. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Akumakami64 for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.